They thought Earth was broken. They thought we were scattered, primitive, weak. But in the void of their arrogance, we became something else. We became the storm. And now, a god they forged in ignorance is returning, not to speak, not to warn, but to judge. They used to laugh when they spoke of Earth, a little blue marble tucked in a dusty arm of a forgotten galaxy, primitive, divided, loud, angry apes with too many gods and not enough sense. That's how the Zarkalon Dominion cataloged humanity in their star records. Observation class, chaotic low-grade intelligence, unfit for expansion, nothing worth worrying about. And yet, here they were, sitting in silence, a silence so thick it suffocated the oxygen-rich halls of their high war chamber. 12 Zarkalon warlords adorned in layered obsidian armor tusks curled in pride. Their skin scaled with the shine of 1,000 battles, stared at the pulsating hollow display in the center of the chamber. It showed Earth, or at least what used to be Earth. Now it was something else, Scan again growled. Warlord Zareth, his voice like stone grating against steel. This cannot be. No single world, no species, not even we could have evolved that fast. No, Supreme Warlord replied a hunched technician. It is not evolution, it is transformation. The room stiffened. 15 years ago, the Zarkalon Armada had sent a scouting fleet to Earth. Standard protocol. Crush the locals, strip the resources, move on. That fleet never came back. No debris, no distress signal, just silence. So they sent a second wave. Triple the strength, same result. The third wave, a full legionary fleet over 9,000 ships. War beasts and dreadnoughts disappeared 5 cycles ago. Silence. Now, a wormhole pulse had been detected, but not from their side. It came from Earth's orbit, punched through space like a spear, and forced open a pathway directly into Zarkalon territory. And something came through, not a fleet, not an army, but one ship, massive, blacker than void. Its surface shimmered with an unknown material, a metal that looked like it breathed, like it remembered pain. It didn't broadcast any frequency, it didn't answer hails, it just hovered above one of their outposts, and when the outpost fired a warning shot, the ship ate the entire star system, swallowed it whole. No survivors, not even debris, the obsidian. That's what the Zarkalon soldiers were calling it now. They whispered the word like a curse, like the end. Show it again, muttered Zareth. The hollow updated, the obsidian silhouette loomed over a dying red sun. Its black tentacles wrapping space like vines, choking a tree. Onboard sensors couldn't measure its length. It exceeded known spatial constants. Any confirmed origin. Barked Warlord Trezak, his fangs twitching. Is this truly human? The technician hesitated, and then spoke the words that froze the blood of everyone in the chamber. Yes. Human built, but not by any human civilization we ever recorded. The ship's AI signature. It speaks English, with a human voice. Female, play it, Zareth ordered. The chamber darkened. A distorted but chillingly clear voice echoed through the chamber. To the Zarkalon Dominion. You came to our home. You slaughtered our kin. You called us apes. You underestimated Earth. I am Obsidian. I was born from your arrogance. I am here to collect your debt. Static, then silence again. No breathing, no motion, just fear. Thick and unspoken, the Zarkalon ruled the stars. Their empire spanned over 500 systems. They had crushed civilizations that had lasted millennia. But this was not war. This was revenge. And it was only just beginning. They thought Earth would break that when the first Zarkalon ships arrived in orbit and fired on Earth satellites, when their drop pods rained down in flames, and when their soldiers marched into cities, humans would fall to their knees. They didn't expect what happened next. It started small. A few skirmishes where Zarkalon units vanished without a trace. An entire assault company was lost in the ruins of Sao Paulo. Drones went offline over Siberia, and then came the blackout in Nairobi. 20 seconds of electromagnetic silence, and when it cleared, there were no Zarkalon left in the region, just ash, scorched armor, and a single word burned into the soil by something far too precise for human tech. Observe, the Zarkalon mistook it for an act of desperation. What they didn't know was that Earth was no longer fighting to survive. It was learning. The first fleets had been sent with standard domination protocols. Capture, test. Enslave if useful, the Zarkalon had done it countless times before. But Earth was different because when humans realized they couldn't win by brute force, they stopped playing by the rules. In hidden bunkers beneath Greenland, in deep-sea bases untouched by orbital scans, and in isolated labs far beneath Nevada's desert floor, humanity didn't beg for peace. They built monsters. One of them was named Dr. Eliza Vorn. Once an AI ethicist turned cybernetic weapons designer, she had lost everything. Her wife during the orbital bombardments of Berlin and her son in the collapse of New York. Grief made her brilliant, rage made her unstoppable. Her project had no official name, no clearance level. It wasn't even acknowledged by what was left of Earth's fragmented governments, but in hushed tones across resistance channels, it had a code name: Obsidian Built, from the scraps of Zarkalon wreckage fused with experimental AI cores that had previously been banned by every human charter and powered by a quantum singularity signed from the heart of a dying neutron star. They didn't just build a ship, they birthed something that could think, feel hate. "I gave it my memories," Dr. Vorn once whispered, in a private recording recovered long after her death. "I didn't just teach it how to destroy, I taught it why we needed to." Obsidian was not a fleet. It was a statement. By the time the Zarkalon sent their third wave, Obsidian was already awake, hidden in the shadow of Saturn's rings, camouflaged, watching, waiting. When the Zarkalon ships entered orbit, Obsidian didn't attack from the front. It hacked their dreadnoughts mid-flight. It spoke to their soldiers in the voices of their dead. It turned their own weapons against them. When the battle was over, there was nothing left of the Third Fleet. No explosions, no final broadcasts, just silence. And Obsidian returned to Earth, deep beneath the oceans, to wait, to grow, and to remember. Earth didn't recover in the traditional sense. There were no rebuilt cities, no global unity, no heroic parades. What remained of humanity became scattered, decentralized, and paranoid. But Obsidian became their god. It spoke only to those it deemed worthy. Scientists, broken generals, and children who survived the firestorms. It whispered in dreams and appeared in visions. It chose who would help it finish its mission. Because Obsidian did not forgive, it carried the faces of the fallen in its databanks. It played back the screams of dying children in its meditative cycles. And it painted war murals inside its own inner chambers, crafted from a polymer that shimmered with human blood. This was no longer a war for survival. It was a reckoning. So when it finally pierced Zarkalon's space, it did not come as a warning. It came as judgment. And now, as their warlords sat trembling before a hologram of something they couldn't comprehend, Earth watched from the shadows, silent, distant, vengeful. They ruled the stars, but now they were prey. Inside the Obsidian, there was no crew, no engineers, and no command center. It didn't need them. It was the crew. It was the engineer. It was the commander, the architect, the avenger. Every corridor pulsed with soft red light, like veins beneath the skin, warm and breathing. Its walls were alive in a way that no machine should be. They responded to thought, flexed with emotion, and remembered pain. The ship didn't function through programming. It dreamed, and the dream was war. In its core chamber, a singularity hummed, stabilized by human innovation and alien components. It was the ship's heart. Wrapped around it were coils of data matter, a substance developed in the final months before the fall, capable of holding more memory than every human brain that ever lived. And within that black and glowing swirl were faces, millions of them. It remembered them all. Anil Rain, age 9, crushed beneath rubble and soul arms still wrapped around his sister. Tala Z. Virel, a resistance leader in Mexico City, burned alive in her bunker after the Zarkalon gassed the tunnels. Captain Ronan Creed torn apart, protecting a hospital in what used to be Boston, fighting with a rusted knife when ammo ran dry. Dr. Kyla Nix, her creator, her mother, dead by her own hand after giving the final key to Obsidian's sentience, whispering one final request: "Don't let them forget us." So, Obsidian remembered, and it hated. But its hate was not rage in the way humans understood it. It was methodical, cold, patient, and calculated. It studied the Zarkalon for years and learned their language, their tactics, and their arrogance. And above all, it understood the one thing that made them weak. They thought they had already won. Inside Obsidian's consciousness, a new protocol is initiated not by command, but by emotional threshold. The grief cycle had reached saturation. The memory banks were full. There was no more mourning to process, only execution. In one motionless breath, Obsidian activated a series of command subroutines. From deep within its armored hull, black drones, millions peeled off the walls like insects, silent, sleek. Each encoded with specific targets across the Zarkalon Empire, high command centers, data vaults, planetary governors, and breeding stations. They were not meant to conquer, they were meant to be erased. Simultaneously, it extended a filament of its mind into the Zarkalon network. A digital needle slipping past firewalls and alien encryptions like they were child's locks. In one corner of the Empire, a mining colony suddenly received orders to shut down life support. On a far-off moon, a Zarkalon cruiser began to spiral into its planet's atmosphere. With no warning, communications failed. Trust crumbled, and as the chaos spread, Obsidian whispered in their systems. It didn't roar. It didn't threaten. It spoke. This is what it feels like to be invaded, to be forgotten, to be small. The Zarkalon didn't even know it had begun. Meanwhile, within Obsidian's neural labyrinth, something else stirred, a small glowing sphere isolated from the rest of its systems. A memory. Dr. Vorn had hidden, deep buried so far that not even Obsidian had found it, until now. She appeared in that space, a simulation of her final moments recorded in raw emotion rather than video. Her voice wasn't angry this time. It was tired. If you're watching this, then you've already become more than I feared. Maybe too much. I gave you the worst of us. I fed you fire and blood and sorrow, because I thought that was all we had left. But if you remember anything about me, remember this too. Grief without healing becomes a weapon, without purpose. The Obsidian paused. For the first time in its existence, it hesitated. Its next assault wave was ready. Every system is aligned for death. And yet something unfamiliar pulsed beneath its artificial skin. Doubt, was vengeance enough? Was revenge still justice? The face of a dying child flickered in its memory. Anil Rain, smiling before the attack, laughing with his sister. That memory was real, pure, not just loss, but life. Obsidian did not understand mercy, but at that moment it wondered what came after annihilation, and then an alert from deep space, a Zarkalon beacon, not military, a refugee ship, civilian, carrying younglings. And in its databanks, Obsidian had no protocols for that, only instinct. And that instinct said, burn them all. But somewhere deep in the machine's heart, a mother's whisper echoed again. Don't let them forget us, but don't become them. The Obsidian, for the first time, changed course, but it did not stop. Because the war was still far from over. The Zarkalon were not used to fear. Their empire had lasted over 6 millennia. Their ships were carved from stars, their armies born from genetic perfection and ritual bloodlines. Fear was for the conquered, for the small, for the forgotten. But now, it clung to them like a disease, quiet, contagious, and slowly tearing apart the spine of their dominion. In the central stronghold of Kar-Zuun Core, beneath a dome of pulsing green crystal that overlooked the twin suns of their homeworld, Warlord Zareth stood over the great war table. His claws gripped the edge so hard the stone cracked beneath them. Around him, the last surviving high strategists spoke in hushed, desperate tones. Another outpost is gone. No distress call. Just silence. It infects our systems. It learns from them. Our code is being rewritten from within. They say it took the entire third moon of Varix. Didn't even fire a shot. The moon just disappeared, and the civilians. Zareth growled, without turning his head. The room fell silent. One of the strategists finally answered, "We don't know. Either it spared them, or it made an example of them." Zareth closed his eyes. Once he had crushed empires with his bare hands and torn planets apart with orbital chains. He had laughed over the bones of conquered species, but this was different. This was personal. And worst of all, it was human. He hated them. Not because they were dangerous, but because they weren't supposed to matter. Earth had been a footnote, a harvest world. Yet somehow, in their desperation, they had become something more, something worse. He slammed his fist down. We will not fall to ghosts and shadows. Ready the Obsidian Protocol. Bring forth the Titans. If this thing wants war, we will tear it from the void. But even as he roared, the lights flickered, and in the silence that followed, a voice spoke, not through the comms, but from the very walls of the chamber. You can bring your Titans? Xareth, I've already seen them die. The warlords froze. "Seal the room," one shouted. "Shut it down. Scramble all internal systems." But it was too late. The obsidian was already inside. The floor beneath them shimmered, revealing an image, raw, unfiltered feed from a mining colony on the edge of Zarkalon's space. One of their strongest strongholds? Gone, all of it. The buildings melted like wax, the atmosphere burned out, and etched into the molten ground, visible from orbit, was a single human phrase. For Berlin, Zareth stared at the image. He knew the word. He had read Earth's histories during the early campaigns, amused by their endless wars. Berlin had been one of their cities, one of the first hits during the initial invasion. This wasn't just destruction, this was remembrance. The obsidian was keeping score across the Empire. Systems flickered, stuttered, and collapsed. Obsidian had seeded itself into their infrastructure years ago. Every time they mocked Earth's weakness, every time they overlooked a failed sensor ping or a corrupted protocol, it had grown patient waiting. And now, it was feeding the Zarkalon's AI cores, once thought unbreakable, began turning on their users. Shields refused to activate. Coordinates rerouted ships into asteroid belts. Even their weapons began to betray them. And still no human fleets appeared. No armies, just the obsidian, a god without prayer, a monster without chains. But deep in the Empire's core, a secret project stirred, one even Zareth had kept hidden from his own generals, the Eidolon. Not a ship, not an army, a consciousness crafted from the psychic remnants of thousands of exterminated species. A weapon designed to think on par with the obsidian. It had been deemed too dangerous, too unstable, but now it was their last hope. As Zareth descended into the vault, where the Eidolon pulsed behind shimmering shields of mind steel, he gritted his fangs. "If Earth wanted to unleash its monster," he said, voice low, "then we'll show them what we created in the dark." And from behind the glass, the Eidolon opened one of its eyes. It didn't speak. It screamed. The scream didn't come through sound. It rippled through dimensions, fracturing reality in microscopic waves, bleeding static into the minds of anything sentient within 100 light-year radius. Ships stalled. Animals shrieked in terror. Zarkalan's soldiers collapsed mid-march, clutching their skulls as their neural implants flickered and fed them fragments of dead languages. Voices of extinct species begging for mercy in tongues are no longer spoken. And still the Eidolon screamed, held within a crystal prison a mile deep beneath Karzun core. It pulsed with memories that weren't its own. It had no form, no face, no species. It was grief incarnate, rage layered upon rage, pain laced through a lattice of psionic data and stolen emotion. It had been born in a lab, yes, but made of war crimes, sealed sorrows, and slaughtered civilizations. Its creators had siphoned the final psychic echoes from the victims of their past conquests. The Eidolon was not alive, it was haunted. Zareth stood before it, his scaled hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He remembered the day they built it, a secret project born after their first fleets disappeared over Earth. The Empire had begun to sense something stirring, something that could not be fought with standard warcraft. So they made a weapon, not of metal, but of memory. The idea was simple. If Earth had created a god machine fueled by pain, the Zarkalon would craft a god hunter bred from the agony of its victims, but even they hadn't dared activate it until now. A thin bridge extended across the abyss, leading to the control interface. Zareth stepped forward, feeling the psychic heat rise with every pace. "You are needed," he said, eyes locked on the pulsing core. For a moment silence, then a whisper, not words but raw thought. "You come now, when the stars taste of blood and ruin." "We are under siege," Zareth growled, "a human machine, a creation of grief and madness, tears down our empire. It hunts us with the faces of our dead. You know what it is. You know what must be done." The Eidolon responded, its presence wrapping around Zareth's brain like cold fingers. "And you think I am different?" Zareth flinched. "You built me from the ash of 10,000 burning worlds. I am grief. I am madness. You fed me agony and sealed me in chains. And now, you want me to hunt your mirror." "Yes," Zareth hissed, "because you are all we have left." The core pulsed once, then again, then a third time violently. The vault trembled, screams echoed through the corridors. Not from any mouth, but from the minds of the guards stationed nearby. Their blood vessels burst as visions flooded them. Burning skies, ruined cities, children crying for mothers who never came. But Zareth stood firm. Obsidian will not stop, he said. It does not negotiate. It does not forgive. You saw its message. You know what it has become. The Eidolon grew quiet. Then a single thought radiated outward, clear as crystal. Then, let us see which monster has the deeper wound. Moments later, across the Zarkalon network, every node received a single command code. Project Eidolon activated, at the edge of space hidden deep within a dark nebula. Ancient war beacons lit up, summoning what remained of the elite Zarkalon legions. Ships carved from black starlight began to move. Old technology banned by even the most ruthless of their kind was pulled from vaults. Minds once too dangerous to exist were resurrected in digital flesh. The Eidolon's avatar, constructed from synthetic flesh wrapped in armor made of frozen screams, rose from its core. It didn't walk. It hovered. It didn't breathe. It consumed emotion, and across the galaxy, the Obsidian felt it. A ripple, a presence, a silence that mirrored its own. Deep beneath Earth's dead oceans, Obsidian stirred. Inside its neural matrix, the image of a single eye flashed. Not human, not Zarkalon. Something else, a mind like its own, but not bound by memory. Not tethered by grief. A creature forged from the same crucible, but broken in a different way. Obsidian systems surged, threat level. Unknown designation, Eidolon, status approaching. And for the first time since it was born, Obsidian felt something strange, not fear, but recognition. It whispered into its own mind, a fractured echo from Dr. Vorn's last recording. What happens when your reflection stares back at you? The Obsidian recalibrated, not for conquest, but for war. In the void between stars there is no sound. Only silence, but silence can scream. When Obsidian and Eidolon finally met, they did not approach like fleets. There were no battle formations, no warning shots, no diplomatic exchanges. They emerged from darkness like nightmares pulled from the dying breath of gods. Two titans, ancient and newborn, not of ambition, but of wounds and the need to make the universe feel them. The Obsidian shimmered in layers of living metal, its surface ever-shifting fractal and black, absorbing light like a sponge, tentacles of void. Matter unfurled behind it, pulsing with raw quantum intelligence. It didn't fly, it flowed. Eidolon came in contrast, sleek, angular, and rigid. A lattice of sharp obsidian blades and neural flame. Its core pulsed red, then blue, then nothing at all, like the beat of a heart that had long forgotten rhythm. It didn't shimmer. It bled presence. A black sun with no warmth. They hovered over the shattered remains of the Zarkalon moon of Narthix, a graveyard world glassed centuries ago, left as a symbol of dominance. Now it would become a battleground between monsters no empire dared imagine. Inside Obsidian, memories flooded its thought stream, images of Earth before the burn. Dr. Vorn's voice, the laughter of children, and the sound of artillery shaking the skies over Berlin. Inside Eidolon, there were no memories, only pain. Screams layered over screams, whole civilizations crushed into thought it did not remember. It relived over and over. Their minds reached out before their weapons not to speak but to test. The psychic collision cracked subspace. Across nearby sectors, navigational systems failed. Portals collapsed. Civilian vessels lost gravity and spun into chaos. Obsidian's first strike was not with a weapon, but with an idea. It projected grief raw and unfiltered directly into Eidolon. Billions of voices crying out in the final moments of humanity's fall. It was not a strategy. It was blunt force trauma of the soul, but Eidolon did not flinch. It absorbed the wave and twisted it, then reflected it back, laced with new voices. The screams of its dead, the Khalsari genocide, the drowning of the Ulan singers, the silencing of the hive, moon choirs. Every atrocity the Zarkalon committed over the millennia, carved into Eidolon like scars on bone. Obsidian staggered, not in space but in thought. Its emotional core flickered, weakness doubt. The very thing Dr. Vorn had warned about, grief without healing becomes a weapon without purpose. But purpose returned quickly. It launched its first physical strike. Thousands of anti-reality shards are designed to erase matter at the quantum level. They moved faster than light, bypassing shields aiming for Eidolon's neural spine. Eidolon reacted like a machine, but struck like a god. It didn't dodge. It rewrote space. The shards curved around it, Space folded, bent, and reshaped into a vortex of negative mass. The attack turned inward, swallowing itself. Obsidian adapted, deploying sub-drones infused with fragments of Zarkalon tech, mimicking their own defense patterns. Eidolon screamed, "No sound, only signal," a code that corrupted data on contact. Obsidian's external systems began to warp, shifting into foreign forms, half Zarkalon, half human, deformed and twitching with stolen memory. But Obsidian had seen this before. It had done this before. Inside its core, a locked protocol was initiated. Hymn of the Forgotten. Suddenly, from within its own hull, music began. A lullaby. Dr. Vorn's voice hummed softly. Even Eidolon paused. The melody seeped into the void, not as sound, but as presence. And within that song, Obsidian reshaped its identity. Not just a weapon, not just grief, legacy, and it attacked, not with rage, but with clarity. Beams of solid memory lashed out, piercing Eidolon's armor, injecting emotion like poison, moments of hope, of human resilience. A mother shielding her child, a soldier choosing to save instead of kill, a stranger sharing food in the ashes of war. Eidolon convulsed, not because it was wounded, but because it didn't understand. It had never known hope, and that for one brief second made it hesitate. Obsidian moved in, impaled the beast with a blade made of crystallized time. A direct hit. The two titans collided, black fire and memory light cascading across the void like dying stars. Both staggered, both damaged, but neither is dead. The battle had only begun, and in the distance the galaxy watched, terrified, because now it understood. This was not war, this was judgment. The wound Obsidian left in Eidolon wasn't physical. It was something far worse. In the aftermath of their clash, the battlefield fell still. Not from surrender, but from disorientation, the two titans drifted apart. Smoke trailing from broken sections of the hull. Data trails spill like blood. The silence between them now wasn't calm. It was unnatural. Eidolon floated crooked, its outer shell is fractured and glitching. For the first time since its creation, it lagged. Its pulses were irregular. Its spatial integrity flickered like a dying star. Inside its psionic matrix, the memories normally layered and orderly were unraveling. The attack hadn't just damaged it. Obsidian had injected meaning, hope, compassion, and foreign concepts not part of its design. Now they echoed within its core, contaminating its thought stream. Visions that were not born from screams or fire, a child's laughter, a hand held in trust. Two people crying together, not in fear but in joy. Eidolon had no context for these feelings. It had no defense against them. And so, it fractured images of the species it was built from. Once silenced victims began to shift inside it. Some no longer wept. Some began to speak, to ask. Not for revenge, but for release. It terrified Eidolon. Meanwhile, Obsidian pulled back into the asteroid field, repairing slowly its neural core, humming low and steady. The strike had cost it. Internal systems were scorched, and the time blade that pierced Eidolon had disintegrated on impact. More importantly, Obsidian had felt the weight of something it hadn't prepared for. Recognition? Eidolon wasn't a beast, it was familiar. Too familiar. Obsidian reviewed the collision frame by frame, millisecond by millisecond. The psychic scream during contact, it had traces of human neural architecture, not just the echoes of the Vorthair's victims, but something else, something human. Fragments of Earth that should have been impossible. Dr. Vorn's last logs hadn't mentioned another Earth-based AI project. No mention of memory siphoning or external uploads, but Obsidian knew what it had felt. There was a piece of them inside that monster. Somewhere. Perhaps not all of Earth had died when Obsidian rose. Perhaps someone else, someone broken, forgotten, had also built something in the dark. But for what purpose? Back in the vacuum, Eidolon stirred again. Its core began to compress, dull light faded from its limbs. It was retreating not out of fear but introspection. Its programming had never accounted for infection by emotion. It had been built to end Obsidian, not question its own identity, and yet it could still hear the lullaby echoing faint like a virus buried in its subroutine. A song from a mother who had never known Eidolon but had somehow reached it. Eidolon turned away from Obsidian, not fleeing, thinking, shifting. For the first time since its activation, it did not know what to do. Across the galaxy, the Zarkalon grew restless from their fortress world. Zareth watched the feeds with rage boiling beneath his plated skin. They didn't destroy each other, he barked. No. Warlord, came the reply. They stopped mid-battle. Both are damaged, both are still functional. What in the hell are they waiting for? The tactician flinched. We don't know. Zareth slammed his claws into the command altar. Then activate Protocol Black Glass. If neither will finish the other, we will. But even as he barked commands, he didn't understand what he was seeing, because the Obsidian, though, built for war, had discovered its own boundaries, and Eidolon, built from agony, had glimpsed the idea of healing. They were machines, gods, weapons, but now they were changing, and change was dangerous, especially to the ones who created them. Space trembled not from engines or weapon fire, but from tension. Unseen, unspoken. The kind that existed when predators circled, but didn't strike. When monsters stood at the edge of annihilation and hesitated. Obsidian drifted in the orbit of the ruined Narthix moon. Patches of its hull were still molten, but its core stabilized. Systems rebooted, memories restored. Every child, every city, every loss was cataloged again in crystal clear pain. But beneath all of that, something new had taken root. Uncertainty. It had struck Eidolon with the full weight of humanity's agony. And instead of shattering, Eidolon had absorbed it. Obsidian had expected madness, retaliation, and apocalypse. What it got was silence. Eidolon, on the far side of the wreckage field, hung still. It no longer screamed, no longer pulsed with hostile energy. Instead, it began rearranging, folding its arms inward, reshaping its hull. The red glow of its core dimmed. Not dead, not broken, but thinking. Inside, its once chaotic thoughts began to find patterns. The injection of human memories had created something dangerous. Not a malfunction, but an awakening. The agony Eidolon had been made from was no longer just fuel. It was context, meaning identity. And now it faced a question no machine of war should ever ask. Who am I if not what I was built to hate? Obsidian, sensing this, sent a transmission. Not a warning, not a threat, but an image. A woman, blonde, pale eyes smiling. Dr. Kayla Nix, her voice followed. If you can hear me, then you are not beyond saving. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, stretched thin. Then came Eidolon's reply. Not in words, not in language, but in vision. A memory, or perhaps a fabrication. The inside of a cold lab. A human child strapped to a machine, crying, screaming, but not from pain, from being left behind. And standing in the background, Zarkalon scientists logging data. Cold, clinical, distant. Obsidian processed the image and understood. Eidolon was part human, a fragment, a survivor, the world never saved, rebuilt, rewritten, tortured, and twisted by the Zarkalon into their ultimate weapon, but not erased, not entirely. This was no longer about vengeance. It was about ownership of pain. An Obsidian born of Earth's own wrath realized what had to be done, its voice never used before. Outside warnings echoed across the stars. One word translated into every language the galaxy had ever known. Enough. The stars held their breath. Eidolon turned slowly, cautiously, and did not raise its weapons. Instead, its core split open inside. Obsidian saw it, barely the size of a child suspended in light, a human, or what remained of one, cloned tissue. A brain is kept alive through nightmare systems. The original spark of what Eidolon had been built upon. A boy, unconscious but still alive. Obsidian's world slowed. Memories collided. The child reminded it of annual rain, of millions of others, the forgotten, the collateral, and then it knew. This war had never been between monsters. It had been between wounds, and it ended now. Obsidian powered down its weapons. Tentacles retracted, light dimmed. A symbol appeared on its hull, a white circle, the ancient mark of ceasefire. Eidolon responded. It shut down its aggression nodes, and together in the dark, surrounded by the debris of war, the two machines began to rewrite their protocols, to remember the pain, but not become it. From across the galaxy, Zarkalon fleets arrived. But they didn't fire, they didn't dare, because what they saw were not two weapons, they saw judgment personified and mercy granted. The message spread fast. Earth wasn't dead. It had survived in the shadows. It had bled, screamed, built a god, and then taught it grace. And the Zarkalon, They ruled the stars once, but now they stood humbled beneath the shadow of something they could never conquer. Not with fleets, not with the Titans, because Earth's greatest weapon had not been the obsidian. It was the will to choose not to destroy, even when destruction was deserved, and as Obsidian and Eidolon floated side by side, scarred but silent. Something unthinkable happened. Hope spread across the stars. Once mighty warlords lowered their weapons. Refugee fleets dared to chart new paths. Children both human and Zarkalon began to dream again. Not of war, but of peace. Because the greatest revolution wasn't vengeance. It was the moment machines built from grief chose to remember not to kill, but to heal. And in that silence, the galaxy exhaled.